The gates of hell have opened on Hamas in Gaza in the early hours of Tuesday morning at 2:20 a.m. The Israeli Air Force launched a massive wave of airstrikes on Hamas targets throughout the Gaza Strip. Dozens of fighter jets carried out simultaneous strikes, hitting key sites across Rafah, Khan Yunis, Gaza City and northern Gaza. Initial reports from the IDF confirmed that Mahmoud Abu Wada, the deputy interior minister of Hamas, along with at least 5 other senior Hamas officials, were among those killed in the strikes. The Israeli government announced that this operation was carried out after Hamas refused to release hostages and rejected all negotiation proposals. Behind the scenes, it became clear how the ceasefire collapsed. Israeli officials, in constant communication with the Trump administration, indicated that diplomatic efforts had reached their limits. Defense Minister Israel Katz echoed Trump's warning: if Hamas does not release all the hostages, the gates of hell will open on Gaza. This warning was followed by an extensive wave of Israeli airstrikes. Hamas responded with a threat, stating that the fate of the hostages would remain unknown. Meanwhile, as the U.S. continued its strikes in Yemen, Israel expanded its operations, targeting Hezbollah sites in Lebanon and weapons depots in Syria left behind by the Assad regime. But the biggest concern in the north is the possibility of Lebanon being drawn into war. Over the past 24 hours, the Lebanese National Army and the Syrian military have engaged in fierce battles along the Syria-Lebanon border. While Hezbollah denies involvement, the situation is rapidly escalating, with heavy exchanges of fire leading to multiple casualties. The crisis took another turn when Lebanon's foreign minister, Joe Rei, blamed Hezbollah for provoking Israeli attacks, stating that Hezbollah's actions gave the world an excuse not to pressure Israel to halt its military operations. In response, Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem accused Rei of enabling Israel's continued aggression. Meanwhile, in the United States, President Donald Trump issued a severe warning to Iran, declaring that any attack by the Houthis in Yemen on international shipping would be considered an act of war by Iran itself. The White House reinforced this stance, stating there's a new sheriff in town, and Iran should take Trump seriously. The IDF's renewed offensive in Gaza. After 57 days of ceasefire, Israel launched a full-scale military operation against Hamas. The Israeli Air Force mobilized dozens of fighter jets to strike Hamas infrastructure, including command centers, tunnels, weapons warehouses and terrorist hideouts. Leading the operation from Tel Aviv's Underground Command Center, IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir and Shin Bet Director Ronen Bar are overseeing the extensive military campaign. Unlike previous raids, this offensive involves securing and holding areas rather than withdrawing after strikes. Hamas had been observed preparing new attacks and rearming, prompting Israel to act decisively. The IDF emphasized that the military is on high alert across all fronts, with enhanced border security and defensive measures in place. Unlike previous strategies, this new campaign not only targets Hamas militants but also members of Hamas civilian government. According to Al Jazeera, the strikes have already resulted in at least 232 casualties and dozens of injuries. In response to the escalation, the United Nations Security Council is convening today to address the crisis. However, Israel remains firm. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz have made it clear Hamas must be eliminated. Katz stated if Hamas does not release all hostages, the gates of hell will open on Gaza. Hamas murderers and rapists will face an IDF force unlike anything they've ever seen. We will not stop fighting until all hostages are returned and all war objectives are achieved. The breakdown of negotiations. Diplomatic efforts to secure hostage releases collapsed during a final round of talks in Cairo. Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, proposed an exchange, 10 living hostages and several fallen ones in return for a ceasefire lasting until the end of Passover. Hamas rejected the offer. Israel then countered with a proposal for the release of 8 hostages, but Hamas insisted on prioritizing American citizens and demanded an immediate ceasefire with a full withdrawal of IDF forces from Gaza. Israel saw this as a manipulative tactic and walked away from the talks. Following this breakdown, the Israeli government, in full coordination with Washington, approved a military response. Unlike previous U.S. administrations, the Trump administration did not require Israel to provide humanitarian aid during the renewed offensive, a shift that Israeli officials believe could strengthen their position against Hamas. In a statement, Hamas blamed Netanyahu's government for endangering the hostages, urging Arab nations and the United Nations to intervene. But Israel made its stance clear: it will no longer tolerate Hamas psychological warfare and terror tactics. Escalation in the north. As Israel fights Hamas in Gaza, tensions are rising on the Syrian-Lebanese border. Hezbollah and Syrian forces have been engaged in escalating battles, with casualties reported on both sides. The conflict stems from deep-seated rivalries, but the immediate spark was the alleged kidnapping and killing of 3 fighters from the new Syrian army near Homs. Hezbollah denied involvement, but armed clashes erupted. Rockets and anti-tank missiles have since been exchanged, with Lebanese and Syrian military forces now actively engaging in combat. The Lebanese government has directly blamed Hezbollah for dragging the country into another conflict. Lebanon's foreign minister stated it was not the government that declared war in support of Gaza or threatened to conquer northern Israel, it was Hezbollah. The U.S. strikes back against the Houthis. Meanwhile, in Yemen, the U.S. has intensified its military campaign against the Iranian-backed Houthis. Trump has drawn a clear red line, warning Tehran that any further attacks on international shipping will be met with direct consequences. During overnight strikes, at least 53 Houthis were killed, including Abdul Malik al-Houthis' personal security chief. This comes after months of Houthi aggression, including the hijacking and destruction of international vessels in the Red Sea. Though the Houthis claimed they targeted the USS Harry S. Truman, the Pentagon confirmed that no U.S. ships were damaged. However, the U.S. military has vowed to continue its operations until the Houthis cease their attacks. Israeli intelligence warns that the Houthis may attempt strikes against Israel as well. IDF officials believe that targeting Houthi leadership could weaken their operational capacity and allow Yemen's government forces to regain control. Final thoughts: as the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, and other Iranian-backed militias intensifies, one thing is clear: Israel will no longer tolerate terrorism on its borders. The world is at a turning point, and Israel is determined to protect its citizens and secure its future. In times like these, we ask for your support. Spread the truth, share this report, and most importantly, pray. Pray for the hostages in Gaza. Pray for the safety of IDF soldiers. Pray for civilians caught in the crossfire. And above all, pray for the peace of Jerusalem.